G'day guys and welcome back to the Supercoach Swordplay at YouTube channel. Today you're here with me, Janath, for the Calrton Team Preview, and I'm joined with a very special guest from Supercoach Edge, as well as Blue Bag Reg. We have Damon. Hello Damon, nice to meet.
G'day.
Nice to have you back on the channel.
G'day, Janath. Thank you for the invite, mate. Very, very appreciative of you extending the invite to a fellow bagger and myself and you. I couldn't think of a dream matchup, really, when it comes to chatting all things Carlton. I've been fortunate enough to have you on, as you mentioned, my not quite new at this stage, but it's been in existence for about 6-7 months now. Blue Baggers Edge. It was great to have you on, and I'd be keen to get you on yet again to pick your brain because you are a very knowledgeable Carlton man that I do respect very, very highly the thoughts of. So keen to get into this, mate. A fair bit of Supercoach relevant players to talk about when it comes to our side. A few cash cows, a few primos. So we'll get into all that, I imagine, and be good fun.
Nah, pleasure. Always a pleasure being on Blue Bag Reg, mate. The cutting edge analytics. If you've got any baggers out there, definitely a YouTube channel to go and support, as well as follow along with what Damon goes through throughout the season. I guess without further ado, we'll just get straight into it. A bit of housekeeping is that the Supercoach Swordplay season guide, which all four of us at Supercoach Swordplay, as well as a bunch of other content creators, including yourself, Damon, have been getting involved in, is ready to be released next Friday, the 21st of February.
Ooh.
So mark that day into your calendars. We got a couple of discount codes here. So you got Damon, you've got SC Edge 10 for you guys, and then 3MU 10 for us at Third Man Up as well. So if you haven't got yours yet, it's just $20 with a 10% discount. You can get it at 18. We're looking at about 300 pages. So this really is the Supercoach prospectus for those that have been missing out on something like that since the AFL prospectus went kaboom. So let's get into the Carlton Team Preview then. And what better place than, I guess, in typical Carlton fashion. Let's start off with the rehab room then. So Damon, I'll handball it over to you, mate. Can you just give us a bit of a rundown as to what the rehab room looks like?
Yes, well, you're totally right. Injuries and Carlton go hand in hand, which we're hoping in 2025 that will be a thing of the past, and there's a bit of separation there. But we have had, if you have been following all things injuries, especially with Carlton, a couple of hiccups. First and foremost was Sammy Walsh. Did strain his hamstring. He's on the comeback trail, which is good to see. Didn't participate in the most recent, open training session, match simulation that they had there, which was the Saturday just gone. But he did run laps, and the crowd was up and about to see him back on the track, which is good to see. There was, as we mentioned throughout, about injuries and scares with Carlton. Another scare with Charlie Curnow coming out of open training in that match sim. He's had a bit of, knee discomfort, they've called it, with Charles. He has been cleared of any structural damage, which is a big, big plus. But he will be nursed over the coming weeks, you'd think, and won't face St Kilda in that, I guess they call it the unofficial practice game. Yeah. Outside of that, there has been recent news, which you brought to my attention, Janath. One of the Campo twins, Lucas, is under a little bit of a cloud. Is that correct?
Ben, so he's
Ben, sorry.
remains on restricted duties as he recovers from an ankle infection, which doesn't sound too kind at all. But but just one of the Campo twins. Even myself as a passionate blue bagger get it mixed up a little bit, but I think Ben's the inside mid, and so I guess we are well stocked in that area a little bit, so it's okay to just let him settle into the season, get through the VFL before he tries to push himself for senior selection. Is there any other, apart from, I guess, the other big one there, Nick Newman, out for the season with that knee injury? Really, really unfortunate because we'll probably talk about him. He's one of those players where he's just so highly internally rated, but just doesn't get that external credentials. Probably a top 5 importance player in terms of structure. We'll talk a lot about him in this episode in terms of Supercoach ramifications, but is there anything you want to add there, Damon?
No, you've hit the nail on the head. I think I'm just reading through an article here by Chloe Williams, another fellow bagger, does some fine work for Code Sports and the Herald Sun. And she just rounded out saying that, Ben is the most recent one under a cloud. Charlie's been clear of damage. Sammy Walsh is on the comeback trail. And a quote here from Vossi saying that they're hopeful that Charlie Curnow will be able to play against the Giants in the Feb 28th clash alongside Walsh as well. So Walsh is probably the more Supercoach relevant. Charlie was a little bit in 2024 until he got injured, but it will be good to see Walsh, especially myself. I'm a massive fan of Walsh. He's my favourite Carlton player at the moment, and I'm very keen to see him get back and hitting his straps because I think his season high average historically is 117. So he's underpriced if he can hit that, but we'll get into Walshian along with a few others as well. So I won't ruin the surprise.
That's good. Well, on the flip side then, let's talk about burning it up. I've got a couple of names which I'm just going to throw out to you, mate, and then you can add on to that. So the big one, which I feel like most people already have in their teams but would like to hear, is Jagger Smith. He's just set the ground running as soon as he's got to the club. Looks to already be in the best midfield mix at Carlton, and if he's not playing in the midfield, we can see that they sort of bracing him to have an Arsenal both behind the ball and ahead of the ball. Some at when he was playing in the juniors, he was going forward a little bit. That small stature is the only thing which I do worry in terms of sending him forward. He's not really in the mould of a Jason Horne-Francis that can just go ahead of the ball and take pack marks sort of thing. But look, a player of that quality has the junior skill set, and when we get to talking about Jagger, there's a key part to him intangibly that I think will set him apart from the other rookies this year. So that's one there. One of the whipping boys from last year, Razia Fantasia, is also setting the ground alight. Not exactly Supercoach relevant, but it's always good to have a small forward that's healthy and playing. One of the things that Carlton fans have just been crying out for really since Eddie Betts moved on from the club. And then on the other end, at the other end of the ground, there, Lockie Cowan. As I'll let you sort of talk about this one a little bit more, but Cowan, tell me what the Carlton fans want to hear.
Yeah, the good old Moo Cow, he is looking absolutely shredded. Like, he's been, quite sizable, really, strong frame on him. But I saw a photo across, I think it was about a week or two ago, during one of the training sessions, and he's got, like, Ollie Wines has got the big thighs. Cowan has replicated that, and he's just big, strong, added so much muscle to his frame. Yeah. And he was one of the guys that impressed me in 2024, just in terms of his progression, stepping up, and really solidifying his spot in the defensive, setup for Carlton. So I think he'll play a big part. I don't know if he's going to be Supercoach relevant, but he might be a bit of a sneaky one just to keep an eye on. I don't think we'll discuss him, but just keep an eye on him because there are guys that, as we know, across all sides step up their games. They, physically or progressively, just in terms of their the way that they play footy, skill work and stuff. That there can be diamonds in the rough, and he could be potentially one of those. But he has been tearing up the track and looked really, really good.
Nah, that's great to hear there, mate. And is there any other players that you sort of want to talk about in terms of tearing up the track? I feel like this year more than most, it's a bit more balanced. Normally you have, I remember last year it was probably TDK, and then there was some of those peripheral players that were sort of breaking out. I remember around this time of last year, Jesse Motlop was one that was poised to break out, and then he had that stubborn foot injury in the practice match, and he just couldn't get going last year. Anyone else that sort of Carlton fans or Supercoach players should be just keeping an eye on?
Yeah, well, I think, we'll touch on him in a bit more detail when we discuss the players, but I'm a big rap for Cooper Lord. I think he'll play a very big role in Carlton's lineup this season, which we'll get into the reasons why, but he is someone to really keep an eye on, I think, and he's looked really good and impressed. I think, more importantly, the coaching staff in Vossi and Co, because they've put a fair bit of responsibility on his head, I think, heading into 2025.
Awesome, mate. Thank you. So let's now move on into talking a little bit about structural positions. So with regards to kick-ins, before we sort of delve into that road there on Nick Newman, I just want to mention that Carlton is typically, and I'm saying this going back quite a few years, probably to the prime Doherty halfback years, where we always tend to have a varying distribution of that kick-in sort of role. So you can see that Mitch McGovern 69, Newman 64, Sard 54, Boyd 37, Williams 22. So it's not going through one player like you might see at the Giants with Lockie Whitfield, at the Dogs with Bailey Dale, that sort of thing. So now let's break down those 64 kick-ins from Nick Newman. So when we're looking at an ideal or the best back seven, it's probably you've got Weathering locked in, you've got Cowan locked in, you've got Sard locked in, and probably now you have Ollie Hollands locked in. Those other three players are the ones that I'm a bit less certain on, and that probably includes the likes of Mitch McGovern, Nick Haynes, Jack Silvani, Jordan Boyd. What does that back seven look like to you, Damon? And could you just sort of delve into what the ramifications of that Nick Newman injury is in terms of the 64 kick-ins and where that may get redistributed?
Yeah, I think you've touched on it there, and I think the new role that is going to be bestowed upon Ollie Hollands, he's probably going to take up a fair bit of the slack. As we know, as Carlton fans, that when given time and space, he can be a very, very good distributor of the footy. And I think off the back of that, he will be given that role to use his foot skills, in the area of kick-ins. So I think he is definitely one that will benefit from it. As to the rest of, I guess, the kick-ins that should be distributed in this sense to the other players, Mitch McGovern is quite interesting. I mean, in season, I was tracking it, and I always thought, that Nick Newman or Sardi might even overtake him. But Gov has always been right up there in terms of he's being used for his foot skills, to his credit. But yeah, I mean, Zach Williams is going to be up forward. Haynes, to see potentially take some of those kick-ins. I'll just have a quick look here whilst we're here, just in terms of historically for Haynes and how he has performed with kick-ins. I don't think he's really taken too many. 2023 took 2 or 3. So, will anything change with regards to that? Probably not. He's probably used more so as that first port of call as a target with a kick in, as opposed to someone that's going to take those kick outs. But yeah, I think Ollie Hollands or even Doherty, but potentially if he is switched around into defence, because as we know, Doherty is a great user of the footy as well. So he might be the only one outside of that list there that might creep in.
Yeah, awesome. And love the sort of that succinct summary there, mate. But it does go to show that Carlton back seven, when you've got a strong midfield, a really good ruckman in TDK, a strong forward line, that defence, the lack of consistency is the problem which I can see happening right away.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see what Bossy ends up deciding upon. When we're going to talk about Nick Haynes, Jack Silvani, we'll start to talk a little bit more about that back seven there as well.
Yep,
I guess where we can start talking about is Nick Newman. And you may be wondering, well, he's injured for the year. Why are we talking about him? It's to go in line with, okay, if we lose a key cog in Nick Newman, as we were mentioning, probably one of Carlton's 5 most structurally important players, who takes the distributor role? And as you mentioned, Damon, we probably have a couple of candidates there. The main ones that make a lot of sense is Ollie Hollands sort of played the end of 2024 in that position. And when we go to talk about him, he averaged 93.5 points in the last 4 games of the 2024 home and away season in that halfback distributor role. You've then got sort of going back to what's worked in the past with Sam Doherty, not under Michael Voss's regime, but taking him out of that sort of inside mid wing role and putting him back behind the ball where he's previously been an All-Australian, or redeploying an All-Australian again of years gone by, Adam Sard, from a typical lockdown role and making him one of the main distributors. Of those 3 possibilities there, mate, could you do a ranking 1, 2, 3 in terms of Nick Newman's role and who's most likely to be the biggest beneficiary?
Yeah, I think in terms of just first off, I guess those 3 players that could be the beneficiaries, I think Hollands will be virtually auditioning for that role early days. I think the way that I look at it is that if he does falter, there is that backup option in Doc, which, as we know, he's played in defence, he's played on the wing, he can play inside midfield and whatnot as well. But I do think that Hollands will be given that first opportunity. I do think. Outside of that, the other 2 players you mentioned, Sardi. So back in 2023, Sard was actually the second highest kick-in taker in front of Newman, who was 3rd, and was still behind McGovern. So McGovern's actually right up there, and still a key cog in terms of kick-ins. But Sard, 76 kick-ins behind McGovern, 111, ahead of Newman, 40, and then Doherty only had the 14, but obviously more time spent through the middle at stages as well. So I think Sard, he's one of those players that we'll speak about as well, but just succinct with him, I guess I would love to see him be used a bit more attacking. If he's being utilised for his kick-in, I mean, there are a couple of times there where you see him take the kick-in and then run on and take the overlap possession and then, burst forward. For now, I don't know. I think he's kind of being used as more of that negating traditional defending type role, but he's potentially the other option as well. That third option that you were talking about there was the other third player?
It was Doherty. So
Oh,
Hollands,
Doherty, yep.
Doherty, and Sard. And I guess if we could talk about Jordan Boyd in that same category, probably not one that a lot of coaches may be thinking about. He's typically played a lockdown role on opposition small defenders. Could you see him sort of having a slight benefit from Newman's injury? Maybe in terms of job security?
Yeah, potentially. I think that probably is one thing you've touched on just there is the job security. It probably elevates his job security a little bit more and would be relied upon a bit more compared to if Newman was fighting fit. But the big thing with Newman as well is that the way that I saw it with Doherty going down early days in obviously round 0 opening round, if you look at the statistical side of things, if you compare in terms of metres gained for the club, so those players that are running and carrying the ball out of defence, Newman actually had a career best season in that stat. He had 482.2 metres gained on average, who was ahead of the next best in Acres with 409.5, which, as we know as Carlton fans, he runs all day. But with Newman, he kind of took over that role when Doherty went down. And it's like in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, Doherty kind of, I think it was the season prior, he actually was right up there in terms of metres gained as well. So he's got that feather in his cap that it could potentially take over. But yeah, it's a big role, which is kind of what we're all pointing towards, that as a big loss, and we need players that can have that run and carry and not just distribute the ball by foot, but actually distribute, run forward, take possession, which, Sard is that sort of player that can do it. So I'd like to see Sard go back to a bit more of that traditional attacking role off halfback. But as you mentioned there with Boyd, that potentially could open things up for him as well. It's a bit up in the air. There's so many balls in the air for Carlton's defence at the moment. It's so hard to lock down, isn't it?
No, that's it. And I think getting a look at those preseason games will be so valuable in that regard. Well, speaking of Adam Sard, so this is now his, what I believe to be his 4th season. His 5th season at the club. So he's got averages of 82.6, 103. That's sort of that outlier, not so much outlier, but a really good push in the top 8 defender season there. And then he's gone to 80, 89.6 and 86.9 in those 4 years. So it's very interesting because at age 30, I did hear, perhaps it was at murmurs last year that Sardi just couldn't run. Like there was murmurs coming out at points that like he just couldn't run at all. He's got the kicking and all that. We obviously see the woof going on at games and all that. But he, for the most part at the club, he's been a lockdown small defender, and that's going away from that all-Australian best that we've seen off Adam Sard in years gone by. And I guess if we were to pick one defender from Carlton in that role, I personally can't really justify paying $468k for Sard when I may get the same output from Ollie Hollands at $130k cheap. Do we agree in that regard, Damon?
Yep, yeah, 100%. There's Ollie Hollands in a nutshell presents way more upside than what Sard does, and like you've touched on there, in terms of the role that Sard now plays compared to like everyone, when you hear Adam Sard, traditionally you think okay, run and carry, dash, explosiveness, but in his previous 2 seasons, which was reflective of his averages, that he's been asked to play a bit more accountable, and he's had some good roles on Cameron and a few other small forwards as well. But, in terms of a Supercoach sense, it's just not translating to high Supercoach scores. So I think when you're comparing Hollands and Sard, you'd be going for Hollands 100% hands down. Even if Hollands was a closer price point to Sard, I'd be going for Hollands and taking that risk on him. I mean, as Carlton supporters, we probably know a little bit more inside information. We watch him a little bit more. But just knowing the role that he's going to take up, and which he had as that, bit part wing come, halfback distributor in the last 4 games of 2024, and he looked pretty good. I think that's a small sample size, albeit, which he looked pretty good in. So, yeah, Hollands, for me, ahead of Sard when you're comparing the pair there.
Awesome. Thanks, mate. So I guess we're just in consensus there of passing on Sard. Nick Haynes, so another Carlton defender, picked up as a free agent, average 119.3 and 3 AFL fantasy points in 9 VFL games in 2024. Now, it may be a bit of a Mandela effect, but Haynes has never averaged over 100 in a season. So I remember distinctly owning him in 2020 when he averaged 98.4. He felt like a pretty decent pick. But priced at 376.5k, you would think there's a little bit of a discount there, given he only played 8 games last year. But is he even a walk-up start into Carlton's best 6/7? And what do you believe? How do you believe Jack Silvani moving back into the defence now after his ACL injury may affect Haynes' role?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think before the discussion came up, or I guess the news that came out about Sauce going back, or going into defence for the first time virtually in his career on a full-time basis, I think it was like, well, Haynes has probably got a walk-up start, and he's going to help the likes of Wieders and Gov as sort of that mid to tall defensive option, providing that support there. But I think there's a little bit of a question mark. I still think he is a best 23 player. He did come as a delisted unrestricted free agent or whatever. So, I mean, he came cheap, but I think even if we were to trade for him, he does play a role in our defensive lineup. So I do expect him to see him play. Just with his scoring as well, he did remind us in 2024 at stages that he still can bust out these nice scores. He scored 87, 78, 116, 97 and 88 across a 6-game stretch. But I think the one thing for me is that even at that starting price of 376.5k, is just hard to justify buying, especially with his durability, which is the biggest worry. And then you weigh it up alongside the fact that he's in a new side and defensive setup, and we don't know the role that he's going to have. If he had a loose, third tall defensive option or role, that would be incredible. Taking those marks, roaming across half back, but we just don't know what he's going to have. So he's probably a wait and see across the preseason. But even then, at that price point, I think he's just too much of a risk to worry about personally.
Agreed. And I think with that, we really don't know what the Carlton back 7 looks like. And if in fact it is Weathering playing that main key position role, and then, for instance, if it's Jack Silvani playing that second key defender role and Haynes is freed up, then maybe we could view him as sort of, if he's performing quite well, scoring hundreds or close to hundreds on a consistent scale, as a possible defender option. But right now, I think there's too many variables which are up in air to have enough confidence to start him at that 377k mark.
Yeah, 100%.
Jordan Boyd as well. So we were talking before how potentially he's another one of those Newman replacements. Probably has better job security. Played 19 games last year, so for a high score of 94. I personally think he's the best field kick at Carlton. I'm not sure if you differ in that opinion there, Damon.
No, I think if you're comparing him to someone, I think he's eerily similar to Ollie Hollands in the respect that when he has time and space, he is incredible. But when he's under pressure, at times, he can spray it a fair bit. But I do think, yes, 100% that defensively, when we're talking about those players in the back 6 or 7, he's right up there in terms of his disposal.
Yeah. But again, 327k, just that awkward price. And given that he is so close to Ollie Hollands, it's almost like, for me, it's really a non-decision here, given that we probably have Boyd, who's playing more the defense accountability role at 327k against Ollie Hollands, who probably won't be tasked with defending as much as his attacking flair. In that same line, around that same price. Well, sorry, not line, I mean in like AFL terms, not in Supercoach, given that Hollands is currently midfield, probably going to gain defender DPP at round 7. So in that regard, is that a pass for Boydie as well?
Yeah, I think you've summed it up nicely. There's too much of a squeeze on, I think, in the defensive setup there. So I don't even know where Boyd sits now with, when you throw Sauce back into the mix, and then you've obviously got Hollands coming in. I mean, even if Hollands does replace Newman, there's still a squeeze on because J Sauce is there. So I don't even know, even if he's going to be best 23 to start the season, potentially, and might have to work his way back into the lineup. He was battling with a little bit of form, but injury issues last season, Jordan Boyd, albeit he looked pretty good. It was a breakout season for him, especially when it came to Supercoach. But for me, it's a pass.
Yeah, awesome, mate. And to touch on a defender rookie at Carlton, Billy Wilson played really well in the VFL, I thought. So he averaged 68 fantasy points. in 2024. I can bring up he averaged, where is it here? He averaged 72 Supercoach points in that stretch as well in 13 games. Just one to put on your radar because what I remember from Carlton in that 2023 draft is that they specifically targeted, they got Moya at pick 28, Ashton Moya, and then Billy Wilson at 34, and those are the only two draft picks that ESO specifically targeted that running defender midfielder type. And so I think we may, given that we've already lost Nick Newman, Billy Wilson may be next in line in terms of those attacking defenders to come into the team. So just a cash cow option there to look at. Not a player you're probably looking to start, given he'll probably start the season in the VFL. Anything you want to add on Billy Wilson, mate?
Yeah, no, he's looked really good by reports in the VFL and probably unlucky not to really debut as yet. I mean, he came close a couple of stages, but, with the injury to Newman, it does elevate his, I guess, opportunities in a sense that he could see those opportunities come a bit earlier than what he would compared to if we had a completely healthy back defensive unit. But I think he's going to get an opportunity at some stage in 2025, probably not in round one, but he might be a nice little downgrade option potentially later in the season. So still one to watch off the back of that, but very exciting prospect.
Possibly, mate. Yep. Awesome. Let's now talk a little bit about the crux of the Carlton Blues setup, which is the centre bouncers. So really, the loss of Bam Bam Kennedy, Matty Kennedy, one of the sort of the stalwarts of the Carlton lineup, the way that he was treated in that elimination final, just absolutely abysmal. We won't talk about it. It makes my heart ache, mate. But
yes, likewise.
Matty Kennedy, 33% CBAs just goes whooshka. Paddy Cripps at 79%, Sam Walsh 70%, George Hewitt 68%, let's say Adam Chera 49%. Jack Carroll's also gone, and then Elijah Hollands at 18%. So they're probably the core five at the moment that played last year that you're probably looking as definite best 22 options this year. Cooper Lord's one of those players that are probably on the periphery. With those five players that I just mentioned there, mate, where do you see the centre bouncers changing now that you've got Jagger Smith, you've got Sam Doherty, that you have to add into that mix? Where do you see those CBAs fluctuating?
Yeah, you've mentioned it there in terms of like there's 55% combined CBAs from both Carroll and Bam Bam Kennedy that need to be divvied out. So, Jagger Smith, as you mentioned, he comes in, he should be a walk-up start in round one. He will come in and eat up a majority of that. Likewise, Chera, you'd think should have his CBAs elevated from the 49% at various stages, battling fitness. He was played off half-back in defence randomly, which I don't think will happen again, considering we've got a full array of defenders, as we've spoken about. But at his peak, Chera, he's averaged 57% CBAs, so that should, you'd think, at the very least, go up towards that mark, if not more. And then Cooper Lord, 53%, which is quite surprising. I thought he might have played a little bit less, but it just goes to show off the back of, Kennedy and Carroll as well, that he might get these extra opportunities afforded his way. So as, one of the few remaining contested players that we have in the engine room, Cooper Lord, Cripper, I think he should be given some CBAs, just given the requirement of another, sort of blockhead in there, in and under. And then it comes down to two as well with Doherty, which is his name there at obviously 5%, only played the one game, got injured. But on the recent, I don't know if you've heard of it, the recent episode in Summer Sessions, which is the podcast that Carlton produced, he mentioned there that surprisingly, much to the surprise of myself as well, but that he mentioned he's going to be predominantly playing, at the moment he thinks anyway, either the wing or inside mid, which you'd think he's going to get some of those CBAs as well off the back of that. So I think it's going to be Cripps, Walsh, Chera, Lord will be introduced to the mix. And then there's Doc and Hewitt as well. Hewitt's an interesting one because he kind of fell out of favour at one stage during the season and then worked his way back into the rotations and looked actually pretty good to his credit. So I think that would probably be the main nucleus. And then, as you mentioned as well, those other players that Elijah Hollands might be rotated through there, albeit sort of the last month of the season in 2024, he kind of played a bit more sort of stay-at-home forward or high half forward without rotating through the middle. So there's a few options there for us to go with.
Yeah, and for the write-up that pig mentality from Dr. Supercoach and I, we did a bit of a write-up delving into the top four mids at each club in terms of our predictions, and obviously I did the Carlton one, and I've got Paddy Cripps at 82%, George Hewitt at 72%, so I think that he will be the second cog in that midfield. I think that when Hewitt's in our best 23, I feel like we're an infinitely better side. And Sam Walsh is 65, so just a tad decrease, but I feel like Walsh is one of those players where if he starts at CBAs or if he plays out of the CBAs, he's equally as effective because he doesn't get much of his disposals through contested possessions as much as he's spread around the ground. And then Adam Cherry is the one where I feel like that 49%, like you were saying, the move to halfback. Vossi, please never do that again.
What's he doing? He did it twice, back-to-back weeks as well. God.
Oh, killing me, man. Adam Cherry up to 62%, and then I've got those sort of periphery players like your Cooper Lord. Jagger Smith will probably be in there at some point. Just depend. I feel like when you've got a blueprint like you've had previously as with Harry Sheasel, even Harvey Reid to an extent, and Nick Dacos as well, that sort of player that can come into the stoppages. I guess Harley Reid was a bit different because he was almost exclusively in those stoppages, but it's interesting to see how we deploy Jagger Smith to start his career. And then, like you say, Sam Doherty, Elijah Hollands will be interesting. But given that, let's talk about the skipper, Patrick Cripps. So now the two-time Brownlow medalist, no denying him last year, no sort of, he won it luckily or he should have been suspended. None of that, just pure class. 45 Brownlow medal goals. But, mate, if he lifts that Premiership Cup as a Premiership captain, I will be tearing my eyes out. Totally.
Likewise. We'll be dubbing each other's eyes. Don't worry about that.
29 years of age, was one of two Carlton players to play every game in 2024, and wouldn't you know it, the other player to have played every game, Nick Newman's already out for the season, so Iron Man Cripper carrying the Blues as always. Now, one of the things which I sort of noted doing the research for this is that in the last 4 years, Cripper sort of had a fluctuating average, so he's gone 84, 111, 98, 111. So can he buck the trend in 2025 off a Brownlow season? We've typically seen that many of the Brownlow medal winners of years gone by haven't been able to back it up, but we saw last year with Lachie Neale that he was able to do that, just finishing as a top 8 mid sort of thing. So can we expect something similar from Cripper? We saw with Neale off the Brownlow, another really good season, premiership for the Lions. Can we see something similar for Paddy Cripps to make him value at $596K?
Well, hopefully he can follow the trend of Lachie Neale off the back of a Brownlow and win a premiership. That'll be absolutely fantastic. So I like what you've done there on the graphic. Janath Brownlow, potentially into a Norm Smith. 100% we'll take that as baggers, man. But yeah, I think it's an interesting trend, that one. I don't know what that... Did you uncover any reasoning behind that? Like in terms of, was it restricted games? Was it lower CBAs or injuries or... Strange.
One of the interesting parts for this that I think is, so 84 was the year before Vossi came in. He was sort of, under David Teague, he was almost made, like Cripps was made expendable in a way. That's like how it felt. But then Vossi really reignited that passion. 111, made sole captain of the club instead of the co-captain. And then that first Brownlow. The 98 was interesting because I felt that Cripps didn't have a bad season. But as we got on that stretch of games, I think we won 10 of 11 games or something like that. The reliance on Cripper greatly decreased, and we saw that he got rested a couple of times, specifically that West Coast game, and then you had those other boys, Adam Chera having that really hot stretch, Sam Walsh playing really well, George Hewitt playing most consistent footy of his career, and we saw that reliance on Cripper decrease, only for it to increase again in 2024 when it felt like all of our other mids got injured except for him, or Vossi dropped George Hewitt out on a whim, sort of thing. So
strange.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Maybe this year's the one where we see Cripper be able to again put together that season. But do you believe that his best Supercoach seasons are behind him now?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because he actually did pretty well. I mean, as we know, in 2024, like he actually took his Supercoach game to another level. Like he had 17 100-plus games, which eclipsed his previous best of 16 in 2018. And then, of course, he equaled his highest 120-plus games with 9. So I think there's still, some left in the tank for Cripper. I think the one good thing with Cripper in I guess, 2024 was he elevated the number of goals he was kicking. He was drifting forward a bit more, clunking them, being a bit more accurate with his kicking for goal. And off the back of that, elevated his scoring and, contributed largely to those extra 100-plus scores. But I think, I don't know, I'm a little bit, I don't know about you, but with Bam Bam going out of the rotations, and obviously he's out of the team now, does it place a bit more expectation and reliance upon Cripper as sort of that senior head, especially, at the trenches, in and under type work? Does it benefit him potentially because he's being a bit more relied upon? Or alternatively, does it make him a bit more of a target for opposition teams to put more time and effort into sort of trying to negate? He's a hard player to negate, as we know, but it just makes me wonder off the back of the structural changes if there will be some sort of impact. I don't know how it's going to impact him though.
I don't really see the loss of Kennedy making that change, though, because if you were going to tag Cripps, which some clubs tried to do last year, like I remember specifically Toby Bedford went on to Cripps after his sort of first quarter avalanche in the game at NG Stadium, but
yes.
really it was to no avail. He was still best on ground sort of thing. So I think clubs are now moving away from trying to tag Cripps because even, I guess the one time it did work was when Willem Drew went to Cripps in the return matchup when Port Adelaide came to play Carlton at Marvel Stadium, was able to get on top of him. Port Adelaide won the game. So I don't think it's totally dependent on the presence or absence of Matthew Kennedy. But if they were to do it, then, I mean, it may be for the benefit of the club, but like you're saying, it may not be for the benefit of Cripps as a Supercoach option. I'll give you one thing which we haven't necessarily talked about for Carlton across all of these players, and that's this early fixture draw, which I think is one of the easier ones across the league, specifically for inside mid. So round 1, you've got Richmond, obviously. Round 2, Hawthorn is a difficult matchup. Round 3, again, Western Bulldogs, probably on the more difficult side. But then you've got Collingwood, West Coast, North Melbourne, Geelong, Adelaide in a 5-round stretch where I can see really the Collingwood, West Coast, North games, a game like Collingwood, Cripper always gets up for it, even though I'm going to put it out there that no one else does.
Exactly right. Nope.
West Coast and North, again, back-to-back. And then, wouldn't you know it, round 14 and round 15, West Coast and North. So, is it... And I'll say this because it's another teaser into our season guide, but all the Supercoach Swordplay boys, we put together what we believe to be the top liners in each of the lines, the top 6 defenders, top 6 forwards, top 8 mids, and top 2 rucks. And Supercoach with DR has Patrick Cripps as his M8 for 2024. 2025. Wow. So he snuck him in there. Is that an ominous sign to say that Cripper could buck this trend and go into that sort of 115 range? Yet to be seen, but I think that fixture draw, playing Collingwood twice as well, and Essendon twice, it may be the one that I think could unlock that full potential. Let's move on then.
I like it.
And move on to Sammy Walsh. So, unfortunately, he's gone from Iron Man to injury prone. Possibly that tag gets thrown around a little bit, but it's just so unfortunate. 4th consecutive year now without a full preseason. The year before those 4 consecutive years was his 117 average year. Yeah. And I feel really hard to fathom that possibly Walshy is a player that we can't really consider starting until he can have a full preseason. What do you think, Damon, on that fact?
Yeah, no, I do tend to agree. I've written a few notes here, and that's probably the main underlying sort of takeaway from it. I love Walshy. He's considered my boy on Supercoach Edge. I always refer to him, and I am just, not just from a Carlton supporter sense, but as a Supercoach, I know the heights that he can hit, and you touched on it there, like that 117 average is just incredible, and he was still able to average the 108.4 carrying injury in 2024. Carrying that ongoing back issue, which is something that can follow you around for a fair while. He had surgery on it, and he still had issues with it in 2024, which was a bit of an issue. So I think, I know he's had a setback in terms of his hamstring this preseason. I think it's now 3 preseasons in a row now where he's had an injury limiting preseason, or 4th now. So
4th, yeah.
It's not a good run in, and I think all of that to say really that it culminates in a player that you can't really go into the season trusting durability wise. So I personally I'd love to have him in my team. knowing what he can, the peaks that he can hit. But I would much prefer to do it, even if it means that I have to pay a little bit of extra money if he goes up in price, just knowing that peace of mind, that security, that his injury issues are behind him and his durability is going towards that, being a healthy prospect back to the way that he was, where he's quite durable.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things which I'm not sure if we can put it down exactly to him being injured or carrying injuries, but only averaged 3.1 marks a game in 2024. That's a career low. So in terms of his marks per game over his career, he's gone 5.1, 4.3, 5.8, 4.5, and then 3.5 in 2023, and now 3.1 in 2024. So maybe he's not spreading the ground as much as we hope he can, and that may be attributed towards the injuries, but just simply, when we think about Sam Walsh at 584k, is it as simple as just see how he's tracking, and if you do want to start him, because you're sort of offsetting that injury risk, basically it's like the same principle you take with like an Isaac Rankin, where you don't have to waste a trade to bring them in if they sort of go big. But I think we're looking at two different situations here where there's so many other better players or better options in that midfield, like an Andy Brayshaw, just a couple of $1,000 extra than Sam Walsh, compared to an Isaac Rankin, where he may be first or second in that line if he stays injury free.
Yeah, you're right. And it comes down to the players around that price point that, present probably equal upside, or if not more, but there's no deficiencies. So there's that durability issue that we spoke about with Walsh. Compare it with someone like a Brayshaw, which he was actually battling himself in 2024, sort of the first half of the season. Then we saw him hit his straps and actually look really good. So, we're kind of seeing glimpses of players as to what they can provide when they're at full fitness. And you're totally right with Walshy. Like, he just wasn't able to I guess, cover the ground as well, and became evident. He'd come running to the bench on his haunches. And there was times where I think it was the game against Port, it might have been, where he was actually holding his lower back, and I was like, oh shit, this is not good. Yeah. So if you're having to struggle with that, in season, especially in the first third of the season, it doesn't bode well for the rest of the season. So I would much prefer to just hands off the wheel, watch him. If he breaks out, you're not really missing out on much, because in terms of ownership, I imagine he's probably not that high, Walshy. So you're with the rest of the. There you go. Oh, yep. So you're not missing out, and you're with the rest of the pack. If it means you have to use a trade to bring him in, if he does break out and look to be maybe a top 8 mid, yes, you'd I think be quite willing to use a trade to bring him in.
Yeah, and I will say though, one thing that did go positively for Walsh is 6.8 tackles per game. So really, you don't know what to trust. Career low in marks, career high in tackles, and by a fair margin as well. That's 2 tackles per game extra than his previous career best of 4.8 per game. So let's see what we get from Walsh to start the season. But yeah, as you mentioned, mate, it's probably not one of those players you be willing to gamble on to start the season. Georgie Hewitt, I'm not going to touch too much on him. I just have him in here given the fact that he has a couple of sub-affected games of 39 and 12 in that average. And sort of, we were both talking, I was probably a bit more optimistic, or I am probably a bit more optimistic of his chances this year to get a prolonged run, as in no sort of random getting dropped sort of thing, as one of the main 4 in the midfield mix, approximately 70% CBAs. But can we really see Hewitt going back to that sort of 110 average of 2022?
Yeah, if you subtract those 2 sub-affected scores, his average does increase from 92.1 to the 99.2, which makes him a little bit more attractive. He scored quite well. He showed an ability to score quite well when he was played and not given the sub best. He had 12 100-plus scores and 4 120-plus. But for me, I don't know. I don't really see much upside on what he offers, even at that price point. I think there's other guys around that price point outside of Carlton that appeal to me a little bit more. There's even cheaper guys as well, in the like of a Riley Sanders or a Luke Parker and stuff, that I think can equal the same sort of level of output as what Hewitt can provide, but at a lower price point. So I think in terms of what he can provide, that's sort of limited upside for me.
So some of the players you may be talking about when you're saying that is, we might be thinking Will Day, Clayton Oliver, Darcy Parish perhaps, Will Ashcroft, and possibly the next man that we're going to mention here. Oh, no.
Ooh.
Well, yes, technically,
Yes.
Sam Doherty, but also the following man we're going to talk about, Adam Chera, as well. But let's just quickly touch on Sam Doherty. I feel like Supercoach headquarters got together, they saw the 25 average, and they were like, well, what the hell do we price him at? They made him 488k, which is just like, okay, that's, I mean, fair enough, but...
it's roughly an average of about 91. It's pretty unfair, I think.
Now, when we think about this as a pick, 487,900, I've seen some people on Twitter in particular saying that this is a must-have player, whereas seen other people say, I'm not going anywhere near him with a 10-foot pole sort of thing. Now, he may play in that distributor role, but I think that we both agree, given that we watch quite a fair bit of the Carlton training footage, we try to get down to training when we can, that he's probably going to play the wing role opposite Blake Acres. Now that Ollie Hollands is going back into defence, someone's got to take up that wing role, and it probably looks like it's Doherty floating up into stoppages around the ground. Is that the sort of role that you see for him at the moment as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like, he kind of clarified it himself, as I mentioned earlier, like on that Carlton podcast, Summer Sessions. He was asked, like, where are you going to play? And it was framed to him as if, like, answer this question for fantasy and Supercoach players out there. And he said his first response was, does it help if I say I don't really know? Which is interesting in itself. But then he went on to say that he's going to play a mixture of many roles and said, obviously one of his strengths is playing in many different positions if needed, but the inside mid and wing role, and, that's probably going to be predominantly the best thing for him and where he's going to play. And then he said, if I'm going down back predominantly, that means that something will have gone wrong. So hopefully I'm staying in the midfield or on the wing is what he was quoted as saying. So yeah, he's kind of clarified it himself, but opened it up there as well that it can be thrown around wherever. Like, he's that bit part player. He might even step into that role that's vacated by, Matt Kennedy, who is that Swiss Army knife, ability to play a multitude of positions. So maybe they'd be asking that of Doc, but you're totally right. I think he's going to be playing more that wing role. He's quite agile. Aerobically, he's got that ability to run all day, and just hopefully he's at full fitness. But in terms of being a must-have, as you mentioned, I don't see him as that. To his credit, like, he's been quite, I guess, consistent historically. His averages 106.6, 100.6, 109.6, 97.9, 92.3, 114.7, and a 108.7. So even, I mean, his current price point is around about a price of 91 average. If he reaches 100 average, I mean, he's only a little bit of value. If he was priced, at, sort of mid 300s, you might take the risk and he'd provide a fair bit more upside. But at that current price point, I don't think I would. As much as I love Doc, I don't think I will take the punt on him.
And I agree on that point, because I think when we're considering sort of Carlton midfielders around this price, I much prefer taking a risk on Adam Chera here. So when we consider Adam Chera, arguably, and I don't know whether you disagree or agree here, but I think that he's Carlton's second best midfielder when fit. Like, we saw in that stretch, behind Cripps, that is. So even he's got, whilst we see Sam Walsh is not that typical inside midfielder, I feel like Adam Chera can really provide that for Carlton. So arguably in that regard. But when he is fit, which he just hasn't been able to get it together. So 4 hamstring injuries in the last approximately 2 years. Only 12 games in 2024. That should say 2024 average 83.1, 19 disposals a game. It's just, he just hasn't been able to get a full season together since he's come to the Blues. And when I just go into this next slide, the full Adam Chera experience, and this is what I sort of want to bring up. Round 2023, Carlton versus Collingwood, 40% time on ground, Adam Chera 104 points, subbed off at halftime with a hamstring injury. And I think that just sums up the Adam Chera story, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it shows what he can do, like, at the peak of his powers. And it's just injury has been the one thing that has held him back. And he's been able to average quite well since he broke out in 2020. He's had 90.2, 90.1, 91.6, and 108.3 leading into 2024. So it was kind of like ready to take that next step and establish himself as being that, that player that you could rely upon in Supercoach. And I guess being priced at what he is and knowing that he can reach those heights again, I think of 108.3 when fully fit. And as you mentioned, that stat right there in that round 20 game in 2023, like that would mean that he's around about 15, 20 points like underpriced at his current price point if he can reclaim those heights of 108.3. So the big query is, can he maintain his fitness, get these injury issues, especially the soft tissue hamstring injuries, out of his system? Then I think he could be one of the biggest value selections in the game in 2025. I'm a little bit worried. Just as a Carlton supporter, maybe it's more so than others, but seeing him go down, it's just like almost going into territory of Jack Martin.
It's a dagger to your heart. And the thing is that we've seen Chera do it before. Between round 6 to round 16, 2023, 10 games, 7 scores above 125. And that was what we recruited him for. Averaging 121.1. He was up there with the Bonds, the day cost that year. Like, that is a ridiculous stretch to have. And I think that at 447k, starting him would, like we were talking about with like a Rankin type, you offset so much of that injury risk that if... And also, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. I want to talk about best 18, the flex position, and then starting him. So if you start him, you offset that injury risk, because if he gets off to a 120, 120, 120 start, and another one of your sort of elevated mid-price around that range in terms of Clayton Oliver, Will Day, Darcy Parish, Will Ashcroft don't score that well, you may want to pivot to Chera, but you're taking on that injury risk because you're trading into him. Whereas if you start him, at least if he gets injured, it more than likely is in one of the best 18 rounds. But if he gets injured really early, you probably get covered by your flex, that sort of best 22 scoring every week when you have 23 players on your field. So that's just another factor to take into account with these players that have that hamstring tendency. I mean, if Chera scores 104 in 40% time on ground, gets subbed off, he's probably not going to be your 23rd best player. But at least you're mitigating against some of the injury risk by starting him and then sort of letting it go as the season goes on. And again, we're talking about that early fixture run. Richmond, North Melbourne, West Coast, Collingwood in that first 6 rounds. I think that could really provide a platform for Chera to go off of. And that's probably why, if we have sort of 3 tiers, it's must-have, consider, pass. I feel like, Damon, you're probably in that consider to pass continuum, whereas I'm probably in that consider to must-have continuum there.
Yep. Yeah, I totally like that thinking as well, the strategy behind. I mean, it's an entirely different ball game, Supercoach, in 2025, because of the fact that we do have the flex now. And as we saw last season as well, with the best 18 due to the opening round, it provides a little bit of a fail-safe, and even more so now with the flex. So you've got 2 fail-safes here virtually that, if he does falter, at least you've got the flex taking over. Whereas last year it was like, okay, well, it's best 18 and it may fall out, but you don't have necessarily a replacement player coming in. So you have a couple of, safety nets there to really help you out. So I think, if it was last year, I would say no, too much of a risk. Whereas this year, I think, you're totally right that I'm thinking about him, I'm considering him. I wouldn't say he's a must-have, but when we're talking about value players around that price point, I've got Will Day in my side at the moment, but he's kind of neck and neck with Chera. Because I'm kind of identifying spots in my side that I can afford to use for these risky type plays. And I think, with the flex, with best 18, he's more of a calculated risk now as opposed to an outright risk.
Yeah. So I'm going to put you on the spot very quickly. You don't really need to justify it, but if you had to rank the following players, so that is Clayton Oliver, Will Day, Darcy Parish, Will Ashcroft, Adam Chera, in terms of 1 to 5 for starting team, what would that ranking be?
Okay, it'll be easy for me. I'll put Parish last. Okay. I think he's just what he's able to provide, weighed up alongside value, price point, and historically his injuries. And I think he's still in the rehab group for Essendon at the moment. So he is last for me. I wouldn't even consider him. Ashcroft, he is probably, I would say, probably second last. I mean, small sample size, but what we saw him in the grand final and the final series, incredible. I do like the look of him, but alongside Day, I would say Day is probably a little bit better. I mean, I'm going off the fact that I had him the previous season and he looked really, really good and has been tearing it up across the preseason, fully fit by reports as well. And I would say it'd be Chera and then Day. Chera, again, probably more so. The same soft tissue injuries time after time worries me most. If it was a various, different types of soft tissue injuries, I could probably forgive it. But I'm a little bit worried there. I know he's had treatment and the like, but it's more so for me. I'd like a wait and see type approach. Yep. Whereas with Day, I'd rank him slightly ahead. And I think Oliver, as we all know, and going by his ownership, it's more so his off-field issues as opposed to anything injury-related, and looks really good physically. And I think he's got his mind switched on as well, which is the most important thing. So Clary would be my top get. So I'd be, just to rehash, Oliver, Day, Chera, Ashcroft, and then Parrish.
Awesome.
What about yourself? Are you any different?
The only difference I have is I'd have Chera ahead of Day. But
okay, there you go.
Agree with you entirely there. Like Ashcroft is just one of those players where you got Dunklin, you got Neil as your big sort of players, and I just can't see if McCluggage takes the next step and averages 100. I just can't see 4 Lions averaging 100
4 fiddle
midfield. Yeah.
Yep.
It's
it's very
if one of Neil or Dunkley wasn't there, then definitely getting on Ashcroft in that situation. Let's talk about the flavour of the month then, Ollie Hollands. So as the winger turned halfback, third in the AFL system, averaged 93.5 in that halfback role in the last 4 games of the 2024 home and away season. Now, I've got here, and I don't know, maybe we've been watching some different games possibly. I've got down here that he can run for days, but his disposal efficiency has been a slight knock on him. I remember distinctly a couple of years ago, last year, just tries to take that inboard kick on, and he turns it over, and it just feels like a momentum killer. I feel like it happened a couple of times last year, but maybe what you're mentioning is when he does have time and space, that he's an effective ball user, possibly not under pressure. What do you see in that regard?
Yeah, no, that's totally it. Is that I think when given the time and space, he can be a very good distributor. But I think when he's under pressure, it reminds me a little bit of Paddy Dow. Paddy Dow, like, he could actually, to his credit, do okay when he didn't have any pressure. When he had pressure, Paddy Dow was actually worse because he just bobbed on the boot. But when it came to Ollie, he would assess his options and just choose whatever came to his mind first up. And I remember there was a game there, I can't recall, was it Collingwood maybe, where it was sort of on the half forward flank wing, and he should have assessed that Cripps was already under pressure. And instead of being all right, I won't go to Cripps, I'll just assess my options or just kick it down the line to a pack, he actually kicked it or handballed to Cripps, and Cripps was immediately tackled, holding the ball, turned it over. And he probably in his own mind thought, oh, well, I didn't turn the ball over. No, he didn't directly, but indirectly he did. So that came off the back of pressure. And I think with the role that he might have as that distributor, sort of quarterback role, if he is afforded that time and space where he can assess his options and just not kick down the line, but kick sideways, I think he's a very, very smart footballer. Footy IQ is quite high.
Yes.
As you said there, can run for days, which is part of the reason why he has been played along the wing historically. But yeah, his disposal efficiency can be very iffy. That's the one knock in his game, depending on circumstances and scenarios. But very good thing to point out.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked a lot about Hollands already throughout, but one of the other things which I really like, and he's really eerily similar to Nick Martin from last year, because Martin was again that winger turn in halfback, has very high time on ground, so it doesn't really come off much. I see the same thing with Hollands, but Hollands is 150k cheaper than Martin was last year. It feels like a much safer pick than Martin, and we're considering for the exact same reasons that he's going to fill a vacancy in halfback. He should be getting kick-ins, but it's yet to be seen. I'm not saying he's going to be a keeper by any means, but he probably needs to average 85. Can you see a world where he does average 85?
I think he can. Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on it there with Nick Martin. That's probably the best player to compare him to, especially going from virtually the same role as a wingman to playing that halfback role. And as we saw in the early part of the season, I don't know if you owned good old Nick Martin yourself, but I held firm. I was very close to trading him out, but I was very happy that I did hold firm because his disposal efficiency was the thing that brought his scores down. And I think that could be an area of the game, as we spoke about with Ollie, that could undo him a little bit when it comes to Supercoach scoring, and it could impact him. But once he irons that out of his game, once he becomes a little bit more accustomed with playing that role full time, I think he could replicate what Nick Martin has been able to do, where he's elevated his scores. And I could see him getting like 35 plus disposals like Nick Martin does because of his ability to run everywhere around the ground because he's so fit and he can run for days. So I like the prospect of him. Averaging, would you say 85?
Yes.
Yeah, I can see him doing that. I can see him pushing towards that. Eclipsing it is probably a bit more of an ask, but at that current price point of a lot of threes there, 333.3k, he presents a fair bit of upside and value. So he's only, 2.2% owned, as you've got there on the graphic. Once we see him in action across the preseason matches, that will go up very, very quick, like it did with Nick Martin as well. I had him in my team, and then people were jumping off him off the back of disposal efficiency. Then he had a super game in one of the preseason games, and it might have been against St Kilda from memory, and everyone jumped on him. So, I think it's a very, very good comparison you've done there.
One thing that I will also mention is I typically like to pick my halfbacks depending on how they call for the ball. And last year, when Nick Martin was sort of that preseason pick, you just like he wants it. In the training footage I saw with Ollie as well, whether it's Sard or Cowan or Boyd or whoever it is, it's just like, over here, come on, give me the ball, give me the ball. And that's the willingness you need to have from your halfbacks, because you can't have passive halfbacks be good for Supercoach. You need those active hands screaming for the ball. I want it. Let me take the responsibility for the distribution. And I think Ollie can deliver that. So I almost classify him in the must-have category. I probably had him in my team for about a month now. Do you differ in that regard, Damon?
I haven't got him in my team at the moment, but I'm very, very close to locking him in. The only thing that's holding me back is the fact that he is a midfielder only, available in Supercoach. If he was a defensive mid, I would 100% lock him into my defence. He will no doubt get that defensive DPP eligibility come around or after round 6, but I think it's just a little bit hard to try and squeeze him into my team at the moment because he's going to be taking another player's spot potentially that I do have in my team. So I have to weigh things up with the salary cap and stuff as well, of course. But I do like the upside. Off the back of seeing him in the preseason games, I think, potentially lock him in off the back of that.
That's all good, mate. All right, we'll just touch very briefly on Cooper Lord. We were mentioning before, only played the 2 games in 2024. Fun fact, the best mate of Jagger Smith, so now they're reunited at the footy club, you could say. Healthy points per minute of 0.8 and 0.2 in these 2 games. They were both non-sub affected against West Coast and St Kilda, 69 and 88. And we saw that his scoring improves with more CBA. So I know it's a very small sample size, but 38% for that 69 and 65% CBAs for that 88. So could he be a beneficiary of Kennedy's departure? And at 254k, given his average is arguably underpriced, he should be priced high if Sam Doherty is anything to go by. But could you consider him? Could you consider him, or is he too much of a sub risk in the full strength Carlton midfield?
Yeah, the sub risk is definitely one thing that comes to mind. But from what we've seen, as you mentioned and outlined there, with regards to his healthy sort of points per minute, considering his CBAs and time on ground and everything else as well, he's looked pretty good. With Cripps, the one thing that does attract me is the fact that he is going to have that increased opportunity. As we've spoken about ad nauseum, Kennedy going out of the side, Jack Carroll going out of the side as well. It speaks to me that, Voss and the coaching staff, they have, utmost confidence in someone like Cooper Lord going into that mix, into the fray there, because he's one of the few remaining genuine contested players that can really come in and do the job. The other thing I love about Coops is the fact that he loves a cuddle. So with players that tackle a lot, that, it kind of provides a little bit of, a nice high floor for a player to really build upon. In his NAB league in the junior year of 2023, averaged 5.7 tackles across 11 games. Then in the VFL in 2024, averaged 5.8 from 14 games before averaging the 4.5 across his 2 senior games. So that to me just indicates a bit of a trend that as that contested player who loves to tackle, and part of the reason why he's able to score as well as he has in his 2 games, I think, he presents a little bit of upside. A little bit pricey though, 253.8k. Can you afford to squeeze him into your team? Maybe not. that's one thing that's holding me back. He is in my keeper league. I picked him up last year, and I'm happy that I did, because he is going to be a genuine breakout, I think, at some stage. But we'll just have to wait and see. But I do think opportunity, and with his scoring style, I think he's going to be a very, very nice player. But yeah, you just want to see him be a permanent part of the mix, don't you?
Yeah, nah, totally, mate. And I guess in that same regard, Jackson Binns probably suffers that same fate a little bit. Arguably the best run at the club, always up in the top 3 in those time trials. Could have good job security if like a Blake Acres, Matty Cottrell, Sam Doherty, who play that wing role, get injured. And he himself also scored 62 and 66 in 2 non-sub affected games last year. So possibly we could see that Cooper Lord and Jackson Binns are sort of next in line in terms of those respective roles in inside mid and the wing. But would you say that they're probably both on the outer at the moment, or maybe in that sort of best 20, best 28 sort of thing at the club?
Yeah, I do like Cooper Lord's prospects a bit more than Jackson Binns, unfortunately. Like Binnsy, He's that genuine runner, as you mentioned there, can play on the wing, can play sort of, playing as a centreman. But for me, I think he's kind of on the outer. He's going to have to work his way into the team compared to, I think, Lord. For me, anyway, I think he's best 23, Cooper Lord, and they'll try and work him into the engine room progressively. Whereas, with Binnsy, cheaper price point, but probably less job security in my eyes. So a fair way down the pecking order, unfortunately.
If Lordy can get a good run of things, I think he's got a really good prospect this year. Like he's got the Supercoach profile, I'd say is the best way that I put it. Yeah. Let's move on now to arguably the biggest lock in Supercoach. I won't say the biggest lock in Supercoach, but one of the biggest locks in Supercoach. Just probably the player that you think that if you're ranking all those Supercoach rookies this year, Jagger Smith is probably the number one. And the reason why I think that he's going to be so good this year, and I sort of alluded to at the start of the year, start of this podcast, was that he actually skipped. He did VCE 2 years ago. So last year in his draft, he was solely focused on footy. So he did the Coates Talent League, and then he played for Vic Metro, I think, in the under-18 championships. And his game is just simply built for Supercoach. In terms of his Supercoach profile, he averaged 103 in 3 VFL games last year for Richmond, 135 in 4 under-18 championship games for Vic Metro, and then 154 Supercoach points in 12 games in the Coates Talent League. I think owned by 64.3%. Those other 35.7% of coaches must not know about Jagger, because I think that this is one of the easiest midfield locks going around. He's already been touted as a round 1 lock, and I can't see how that number ownership percentage doesn't increase.
Yep, 100%. Like I've written in the a bit of a sneak peek here to the season guide with my write up on him, but I've said, ladies and gents, we could have our next generation Supercoach pig in the mould of, say, a Dane Swan or Tom Rockcliffe, because this guy can find the footy. And not only find the footy, but use it. And he is just absolutely silky. He's electrifying speed. He's got the smarts. In terms of getting in and under, he's able to navigate out of traffic with a pirouette, one step in a different direction. He has literally got it all. And when I saw his highlights, you hate to compare players, but the way he moves, the way he sort of arches his back as he has the footy, the way he even kicks around the corner reminds me ever so much of a Nick Dacos. And if he can be half the player of Nick Dacos, we'd be very happy with that as Carlton men. But he's just able to find the footy. For the Chargers, he had 33 disposals, 33, 50, 40, 42, and 33 in a 6-game stretch, which just speaks to how much he can just easily find the footy. Yeah. All-Australian, captain as well, runaway winner of the Oakley Chargers Best and Fairest, and finished equal third in the Morris Medal as well. Like, he's got already a resume which puts to shame, or eclipses all the other draftees at the moment. So he has looked really good. And disposal efficiency, I know that's been a bit of a knock on his game. 82% disposal efficiency at the national champs as well for Vic Metro, averaging 29.2. So averaging that high a disposal rate with that high disposal efficiency is elite. When we're talking about, standards of AFL players, if you can translate that across to the AFL senior level, once he adapts to the speed of the game, he could really be anything. Generational talent in a super coach sense. He is a must-have, 100% hands down. Don't worry about that increased price point. He's worth every single cent.
He will be. Yeah. And it wouldn't surprise me if he's one of those rookies that, like we saw with Sam Walsh in his rookie year, that just gets a prolonged run of things and we don't actually cash him out early. Like, I don't really see him being a sub-risk, that sort of player.
No.
If anything, one of the players we'll talk about a bit very soon in Jack Silvani is probably that if he plays round 0, round 1, is probably more that sub-risk. Even a Sam Doherty, I just can't see Jagger Smith being in that sub-rotation. Fingers crossed. Vossi, you never know.
Yeah.
Mr. Adams,
yeah, exactly. God, please don't do that.
Realistically, what percentage of CBAs do you think Jagger sees early days?
I do think that, as we mentioned earlier on, that he probably will be slowly rotated through it. I don't expect him just to come in and have like 60% CBAs from the get-go. As you mentioned earlier on, that he's been able to play like even up forward in the juniors as well, and done it to quite great effect, even as a high half forward, to even try and integrate him into more of the action in that role, which is something that I think they kind of will do early days, and then sort of inject him into the engine room. I think you can probably compare it to Walsh. I mean, if you look at the size or the frame of Jagger, very, very similar to Walsh when he came in. That was a big knock on Walsh's game, that number 1 draft pick, looked really good, super talent, but could he adapt with, the big bodies at senior level? And I think Jagger might be able to replicate what Walsh had. I mean, he sort of was integrated into the engine room. He had 12% CBAs. I can't find it in 2019 that he had Walshy on DFS Australia, but he had 12% in his second season in 2020, Walshy. So maybe he's played more of an outside type runner. Could we even see him being played on the wing? Because he can run all day, and much like as you mentioned with Ollie Hollands, waving arms in the air to try and get the ball back. That is very much him. Which, again, I liken him to Nick Dacos in that respect, because he's able to distribute the ball, run on, and then get involved in the chains of possession from then on in. So yeah, he's an incredible talent. So maybe they could throw him right in there, but I think they might try and ease him in. But at 64.3% ownership at the moment, that should be way, way higher.
Yep. Nah, totally agreed, mate. And I'm excited to see really what Jagger does, because we could have the Rising Star favourite on our hands. Again, like we saw with Walshy. Let's talk about the Ruckman, hey? So,
yes,
I've gone on record previously to DR to say that Tom De Koning is generational, aka...
Oh, yes. Did he laugh at you, or did he agree?
No, he laughed at it first, and then he went on that absurd run, and then he agreed with me, so...
he is generational, I like it.
Generational. He's got contract offers of up to 1.7 million PE on the table from those I wouldn't say stingy, it's the opposite. Those money flirting sainters.
Yeah, exactly. Go elsewhere,
but they're
draft your own talent.
TDK is ours in 10 games without Pitternet, which I think is the single biggest barrier to TDK becoming a top 2 ruckman in Supercoach. TDK averaged 117.6 compared to 39 points less, 78.6 in 7 games with Pitternet. And I guess from Vossi's standpoint, if we were to put ourselves in his shoes, in the games played without Pitternet, Carlton boasted a 9-win, 1-loss record in 2024 when TDK was the sole ruck. Now, one thing that I do want to mention is we saw a little bit of a switch last year when Harry and Charlie both got injured, or Brody Kemp going forward. I can see a world where now you've got Charlie, you've got Harry, and Kemp plays that third tall forward position, which probably lends its way to Harry Mackay being that second ruck, the chop-out ruck, as opposed to needing or relying on both Pitternet and TDK to play in that same side. Do you see...
Good point.
Is that what you also see, Damon, or do you see something else where there may be a need for Pitternet to play? Or let me ask you a different way. What are the circumstances under which Pitternet would be in the side?
I think unless they're going to try and, I guess, go off a sample size of 1, where Pitternet played a bit more time up forward against Brisbane in that dreaded elimination final, and actually looked quite good. He was kicking them like a dead-eye dick and was clunking them. He was absolutely snags for Vola he was channeling. But so maybe, I don't know if they want to do that, but then at becomes very, very top heavy. As you mentioned, Kemp is going forward. We've obviously already got Charlie. We've got Harry. We don't need another tall forward up there. It's a bit overloaded if you go with 4. So you kind of need someone to switch with TDK, and I think you're totally right. If anyone is going to, it would be Harry, who's done it in the past to great effect as well, to his credit, been able to use his size. I think a lot of people forget that he's 200 plus centimetres, Harry, and there's always an ongoing joke with Harry. When I was working at Carlton, we'd ask him, what's your height? Because everyone would always misprint it in the Herald Sun and the Age and the AFL website, and they'd have him at different heights. But he's 200 plus centimetres, and he can ruck in his own right. But the one thing with TDK, I just will mention that when I was looking at the stats, the numbers, one thing that stood out to me, which is very, very interesting, for a ruckman, he actually ranks the 27th best for hitouts, with an average of just 19.9, yet he ranked the 10th highest scoring ruck on average in Supercoach. So that indicates that he isn't really overly reliant upon his ruck work to generate points, and it's instead due to the work that he does around the ground, generating marks, disposals, which is something that really was a bit foreign to him prior to 2024. And then he just upped that part of his game and became a bit more, aerobically, he was really, really good, upped his fitness. And it's really that contested work that he does, in the follow-up work in the role of ruck that lends himself to, have those extra points, almost as that sort of extra midfielder type role. Compared to when Pitnet plays, not only are his minutes limited, but he's then stuck in the forward line where he's unable to generate those crucial points around the ground like he does. So that role is crucial to TDK scoring as well as he has. So, does Pitt play? That's the other big question. What are your thoughts before I give mine? Do you think Pitnet plays? Is he a regular fixture or a bit part fixture at various stages?
I think that he's a break glass in case of emergency sort of option, where if TDK is injured or he needs a rest like we saw last year in that Richmond game, he may play, which scares me a little bit because I don't think that Vossi won't go without Pitnet this year. But before I get to you, Damon, if you haven't heard of these numbers yet, like for those watching, 131, 140, 146, 176, 128. That was a 5-game stretch of TDKs in 2024. Between round 11 and round 17, where he was the sole ruck, and we won 4 of those 5 games, except that GWS game, which was that 128 there.
Speaks for itself, doesn't it?
Yeah. So do you see Pitnet playing this year?
I think like yourself, just going off sort of what's happened in 2024, and I did see the reasoning behind it when they brought Pitt in to play against Richmond and give TDK a bit of a rest. I think against those bigger-bodied ruckmen, I think the coaching staff have probably learnt that TDK, because he does such a power of work around the ground, hence the reason why he scores quite well, that he does need a fair bit of time to recover. But does it need to be in the form of Pitnet playing every single game? No, I don't think so. But against the bigger-bodied ruckmen like a Briggs, like a Nank the Tank, those ruckmen that like to use their physicality in the center circle, they could potentially bring him in to help, I guess, protect TDK in a sense. But I don't think he'll be playing every single game, thankfully, but sparingly where needed. And potentially at the back part of the year where TDK needs to be protected, where as we saw as Carlton men, when he went down, we just lost our shit and lost our bundle.
Season went along with it.
Yep, exactly right. But I'm keen for TDK. He's in my team at the moment. He's a lock and load.
Yep. Was just about to ask you, 33% owned at the moment. Are you one of them? I think we both are TDK owners at the moment. Now, Pitnet coming out and saying that he sees himself as a valuable part of the Carlton Best 22 probably doesn't help with that, but it'll be interesting to see. I've seen let's put it this way, I've seen no inkling to say that Pitnet is in Carlton's Best 23 or in Vossi's Team A plans based off the practice matches and the scrimmages so far. So we'll see if that's to continue.
Yeah, I wonder if he's actually consulted Vossi about that before he spoke about him being the best 23. I don't think he has.
Media trained, mate.
Exactly.
But look, Pitnet is one of those players where he's deceptively young. Like a lot of when you talk to people around like the Supercoach circles, they're like, "Oh, he's probably into his 30s, so he's only 28." Like he's his prime years as well. He's He doesn't want to
Poor
play
Pip.
second fiddle.
No,
So
that's right.
we'll see how it goes. Let's just talk about the forwards then, mate. There's not too much to unpack here. I'm just going to talk very quickly about, this is probably a draft option, Elijah Hollands.
Yep.
We saw last year that he had a 4-round stretch where he averaged 96 between round 12 and round 16. And this actually correlated with him having a really good stretch of CBAs. So that was, round 12, 55%, round 13, 46%, and then 11%, 26%, 45%. So given those CBA percentages, we saw that his uptick of scoring is correlated to CBA percentage. Now, whether or not, given that, yes, Kennedy's left, yes, Carroll's left, but with Doherty, with Jagger Smith, with Chera getting an increased workload, Walsh getting an increased workload, possibly, I'm not sure that the CBAs will be there for Hollands, but I do see him as the boomerang player that we often see at those successful clubs like a Shea Bolton at Richmond, Dusty at Richmond, Jordan De Goey,
Yep.
Patrick Dangerfield. Could we see Elijah Hollands in that role? Possibly. And if it's any time for breakout, I think 2025 is one. Still only 22 years of age. If we can see him push that average to about 90, I think that that's a really good sign for Carlton as a team going forward this year.
Yeah, and I think just in terms of what you've spoken about there, you've nailed it, because he's almost squeezed out of the rotations a bit more now. And it was, as we saw in the back part of the year, I think it was the last 7 games of the season, including the elimination final against Brisbane, that he only had one game eclipsing 10% CBAs with 14 against West Coast. Every other game, he was kind of locked into the half-forward flank there, playing a little bit more high half-forward, as we know. And that's a role for me that I think as a supporter anyway, that he plays very, very well.
He does.
We might see him rotate through the middle in the engine room as that sort of, I guess, relief type play, just to give the regulars a bit of a rest on the bench, rotate through them, and maybe switch them up forward. But, for me, this season compared to last season, I mean, he was priced at 276.3K in 2024 and was able to make 148.2K profit at his peak for those that were brave enough to jump on him. I think now at his price point of 404.9K, if he doesn't get these CBAs, which I don't think he will, there's a limited upside for me, awkward price point, and I don't really see him as presenting too much value, albeit, as you've mentioned there on the screen, more of a Supercoach draft pick compared to a classic Supercoach pick.
Awesome, mate. Jack Silvani. So this may be little bit more of the classic pick that's flowing under the radar. We talked a lot about him when we were talking about both McGovern and Nick Haynes. Coming off an ACL injury in the 2024 preseason, he's training as likely that third tall defender. Now, whether that is as a more lockdown type or as a intercepting type is yet to be seen. But I think that Jack Silvani's ball use will lend himself well to being one of the possibly as distributed. And it honestly wouldn't surprise me to see him taking kick-ins at some point this year. Yep. Like he's been known for his ball use possibly. So could we see Silvani becoming sort of a reliable or viable option as a forward 260k, maybe as a downgrade from Mateus Philippo? Or would you prefer to go for that Riley Sanders, Luke Parker types ahead of a Silvani unless you get further information?
Yeah, he's an interesting one. I think there's almost too many queries about him just because there's a new role. Second to that, coming off an ACL, he's averaged 68.9, 76.1, and a 65.3 in his past 3 seasons prior to 2024, which to me doesn't scream like a Supercoach selection. I mean, at his current price point, he probably presents a bit as almost a cash cow. But, the question is, can he elevate his new game to new heights so soon off an ACL? Personally, I wouldn't have confidence. And 2022 and 2023, when he had those elevated averages, they kind of came off the back of a lot of those, games where he was playing as that relief ruckman around the ground. And there were games there where he was actually eclipsing 100 points in those games. So he won't have that role again, I don't think, because the clubs surely won't put him into the ruck off the back of an ACL, especially with no match conditioning. And then he's going back into defence. So he might, sparingly as a bit part when the ball's back down in defence for stoppages, but I don't think that role's there for him. For me, I don't think that role, if it is lockdown, is going to be conducive to scoring. if he is freed up to play as a bit of a, roaming, free tall defender as a Sicily or a Ryan, imagine that would be absolutely incredible. He would present extreme value if that was the case, but it's a bit hard to assess now without seeing any preseason form. So he's a watch, but he's a little bit down the list for me and not really one that I'm considering.
And it's so hard to gauge what he will score because he's never played the role as a third defender, let alone as a defender. He's historically been a utility or like that third tall forward. So it's definitely one to watch in preseason. First to see if he is named in Carlton's best 22/best 23, and then also what his match conditioning looks like, because he could be a sub-risk and sort of damage that cash generation if that's what you're using or starting Silvani for. Ashton Moir. So he's one of my favourite sort of under-the-radar players at Carlton. Yep. He showed plenty of X-factor in his 2 games as sub. I reckon that first goal that he kicked for his career against the Eagles, probably up there with some of the best first goals ever, really.
Yep.
I see him as a like-for-like replacement Jack Martin. The only problem with that is that Jack Martin only played 2 or 3 games last year in the first team, so it's not really like because Martin's gone, Moyes just going to automatically find his spot into that Carlton best 7. But if we're just sort of using the season guide as just as a preview, can you give us an indication into what our best seven forwards may look like for 2025?
Let me pull it up. You've caught me empty-handed, but no, I'll get into that in a moment. But just with regards to Moya, he is someone that I think when you talk about like Jack Martin only playing the 2-3 games for the season, that's totally fair. But I think in terms of when we're comparing him, we're probably comparing him to Jack Martin in terms of role. And I think it's sort of that mid-sized type player that has a really nice leap, but also equally can be quite clean below his knees and almost be a bit of a bit part crummer as well. He's got a few strings to his bow, Ashton Moir. So he excites me off the back of that. And, his ability to actually, he had the sub-vest in both of his games, played 24% and 23% time on ground, but still had scores of 19 and 38, which kind of gives a little bit of insight into his, impact. He can be an impactful player, probably won't get a whole heap of possessions, but these players that have X factor that can, kick goals out of their backside, he presents as one of those players. So he is in my team at the moment. He's only, as you see there, 4.4% ownership. Do you think it should be a little bit higher than that? Or do you think we're just overestimating him as Carlton supporters and we've got a little bit of romanticism for him as I find my team and I can get back to you?
No. So I currently don't have him in my team. The only concern that I have with him is perhaps he is too much X factor. Like in terms of Supercoach scoring, perhaps he's too reliant on that spark play or that goal like we saw against St Kilda. That 38 that he scored, I think he was only off of a couple of touches with that goal in clutch time really boosting that score up. So regarding the sustainability of scoring is something that I'm a little bit concerned about. But in terms of the play and the quality that he has, it wouldn't surprise me if he goes on to make 150, 160k and plays a role in Carlton's best 7 forwards, which if we think about locks in that forward line, you probably say Mackay, Curnow. I don't know if you've got Kemp in there, but I'd probably have Kemp in there. Jesse Motlop, Lockie Fogarty, and then it gets a bit murky. So where do you go, mate?
Yeah, so the way that I've named it here is Elijah Hollands, Charlie Curnow. Got Jesse Motlop coming in. He's kind of a bit for me. He kind of needs to prove himself. I don't like gifting games to players just because of the fact that we don't have the depth. But we kind of without the other small forward going to West Coast, we've kind of left a bit.
That won't be named.
Yeah, won't be named, but he's a good bloke. Jesse kind of needs. We need to rely upon him. Then there's Brody Kemp, Harry, and then Zach Williams, and as you said, Lockie Fogarty. He is someone that is so, I think, undervalued externally. Like as Carlton supporters, we see him, we see the value he can provide as that pressure forward, especially. He's someone that can come in, and then Ashton Moir as well. So there's 3, 6, 7. There's like 8 players potentially we can try and squeeze through there. Does someone make way and potentially not get a spot on the bench? Potentially, maybe, I don't know. But I can see Ashton Moir starting, but the sub risk. He's already been subbed in 2 of his career games already. But the upside is, I guess, Carlton play the first game of round 1. So we'll be able to assess, is he named as the sub? If he is, I imagine a lot of people will take him out of their teams, which has happened in the past as well. So there's that sort of, we have up our sleeve that we can use to our advantage.
And it may be a matter of fact between Brody Kemp versus Ashton Moore come round 1 as well, because given the size matchup, I can't see sort of Elijah Hollands being displaced there. Zach Williams is probably also entrenched into that mix. So it's really, if you're going from 8 down to 7 forwards, it probably does come down to Kemp versus Moore, and that'll be an interesting battle there. If Moyer does start, then he definitely has that opportunity to possibly make some cash for us as the season goes on. Well, mate, we just hit 1 hour 30 of recording, and that sort of brings us to the end of
very good
all the players that we wanted to discuss. We talked about the CBA mix, we talked about the kick-ins, the ramifications of the Newman injury, all these players in detail. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. It's been such a pleasure to have you on for the Calrton Team Preview. And do you have anything that you want to sort of finish on there, Damon?
No, I'd just, again, like to say thanks for the invite to come on to chat all things Baggers. It's been great fun, and any opportunity to do so, it's I'll obviously jump at, but to do it with someone like yourself, Janath, who's a absolutely incredible bloke, and someone that I respect as well as a Carlton supporter and Supercoach. So you've been doing some absolutely fantastic work, and as you've got on screen there as well, the discount codes, but more than that, the Swordplay Season Guide 2025, literally, if you're watching this and you haven't got your hands on it, make sure to do so. It is absolutely incredible. I bought the prospectus year in, year out, and when they stopped publishing that, I was so sad because, like yourself, I am very much a stats man. I love my numbers, and it's virtually like porn to me, I must say. But it is incredible, and to have a resource such as that in the form of a season guide that you guys have compiled, and I've had an absolute privilege of being able to be a part of it as well. I can't thank you enough, and I am 100% so keen to sink my teeth into this and feast the eyes, I guess. Treat the eyes, treat the ears, everything else, because it's such a good resource. So make sure to get your hands on it.
Thank you, mate. And if for anyone that does want to get it, go to supercoachswordplay.com, go to our products, and you can find it then. Use one of these discount codes if you would like. Well, again, Damon, thank you so much for coming on to the channel, and thank you for all of those that have stuck around for these 1.5 hours. We hope that it's been as informative for me as I found it talking to you, Damon, as it has been for our viewers as well. So stay tuned for the next team previews as well as the upcoming team reveals, which we'll have. I know Roscoe is looking to do his team reveal coming up very, very shortly. And then obviously keep your eyes peeled. Put in your calendars. That Friday, 21st of February, is the release day for the Supercoach Swordplay Season Guide 2025. So until then, take care, and we'll see you guys for the next video. Cheers.
Thanks, mate.